inflammatory speeches. He is not a convicted terrorist. That apart, the investigative agency has caused inordinate delay in filing the charge sheet in the case. Navalakha was arrested in July 2018. Charges have not been framed yet. The trial have not begun. Why should the accused suffer for the incompetence and deficiencies of the accuser? If someone is under trial, why should he be in jail? A jail should be the place only for the convicted criminals. Yes, the accused need to be presented before the court as and when required. But that situation would arise only when the trial begins. Why should Navalakha, who is over 70 years old and who has severe medical complications, suffer unnecessarily? After all, the criminal justice system ordains that an accused would be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Yes, successive governments belonging to different parties have used the draconian provisions of the UAPA to crack down on the critics of the system, accusing them of being Maoists or urban nationals. But what is the conviction rate? As per the government's own data, only 80 out of 1,321 people arrested under UAPA in 2020 were convicted. That works out to a conviction rate of just over 6%. It means that 94% of the accused rotted in jail for years for no fault of their own. Given these facts, Justice K. M. Joseph bench decision to allow Gautam Navalakha to shift to a residential jail is a welcome decision. After all, as the Supreme Court bench itself emphasized, Navalakha is not a habitual offender. He has no past criminal record except this case. He has been a human rights activist, a trenchant critic of the human rights violation by governments everywhere. That's why he has been in the eye of the storm. Navalakha has also been the editor of the prestigious Economic and Political Weekly, EPW, which espouses left liberal values. Of course, despite all this, if the court finds him guilty, then he will have to face the consequences as per law. But till then, his case must be treated with empathy. The court also said that Navalakha had earlier been under house arrest and he had not violated any of the conditions imposed by the court in the past. So there is no reason why Navalakha cannot be put under house arrest again. The Justice Joseph bench must be complimented for taking the expansive view of the criminal jurisprudence that favors an under trial. But one thing in the judgment rankles, that is, the Joseph bench made a precondition that apart from paying 3 lakh rupees to the jailer's surety, Navalakha must deposit 2.4 lakh with the government for availing the benefit of house arrest for 1 month. Mind you, 1 month. Pray for what reasons? 8,000 rupees per day? That's not for the house that he will be lodged in. For that, Navalakha himself will pay for. This 2.4 lakh for a month is for the police to provide security. Good heavens, why? Has Navalakha asked for police security? No. If the government wants to do surveillance, then that is its own job. Why should the man under surveillance be asked to pay for it? If our governments can spend thousands of crores of rupees of taxpayers' money on protection of sundry politicians and celebrities in the name of threat to their life, isn't it that these governments are the same that is asking for money from an accused so that it can keep a close tab on him? Justice Joseph's bench ought to have dismissed with contempt such an unreasonable demand by the National Investigative Agency. We all know that politicians of all hues can stoop to any level to garner electoral benefits. This is especially true of ruling politicians. They sometimes frame policies to serve vested interests, even as they know that those policies would jeopardize the national interest. Let's discuss today the pension policy in specific terms. In the last several months, you must be hearing the buzz around the old pension scheme, let's call it OPS, and the new pension system, which is quite popular as NPS. What is the basic difference between the two, OPS and NPS? To use the official jargon, OPS is a defined benefit scheme. In this scheme, when someone retires from the government service with a monthly salary, say 1 lakh rupees, then she will be entitled to a monthly pension amounting to at least 50% of the last drawn salary, that is 50,000 rupees a month. Should also get a raise every 6 months by what is called dearness allowance. Each raise is almost always more than 4%. This is meant to cover the inflation-induced increase in the cost of living. Good, steady, assured income. This over and above the excellent medical benefits that every superannuated government official enjoys, makes the retired life of a government servant quite comfortable. But if everything was hunky-dory, then why was the policy changed? We know the policy was changed about 2 decades ago. Problem was it was a policy which was quite comfortable for the government servants. But it was a matter of cold comfort for the rest of the population. As our retired government servants started living longer, thanks to the massive increase in the life expectancy in our country, the government found the pension bill rising to an unacceptable level. That left hardly any money with the government to do anything else except pay salaries and pensions. That's when a far-sighted leader like Atal Bihari Vajpayee took a very bold decision. His government introduced a new pension system with effect from 1st January 2004. What was this new system? It was based on what is called the defined contribution system. Remember, the old system was defined benefit system. An employee did not contribute anything but got the benefit of 50% of the last salary drawn as pension. And the entire burden was borne by the poor taxpayer. In the new system, there is no free lunch. You contribute and you get a pension. The amount of contribution was clearly defined. 10% of the basic salary by the employee, and the same 10% was added also by the government. Well, later the government increased its own contribution from 10% to 14%. And these contributions were deposited in a national pension system, which in turn was handled by pension fund managers who invested that money in variety of funds, in safe debt funds and even more adventurous equity funds, as per the wish of the employee. So the exact pension of the employee was not predetermined. It was based on market returns. And the record of the last 15 years tell us that the annual return has been between 7% for debt fund and 15% from the equity funds. So the employee managed to get 14% from the government, and if you take an average 7 to 14%, about 10% of interest thereof, it was good enough return for a government official to be happy about. But if you aspire for the old system, which give you straight 50% on the trot month after month from the government itself without you contributing anything, then of course you are bound to be disappointed. So be it. Why should the government indulge a tiny section of the population, less than 1% people, at the expense of 99% who suffer in silence in old age? Isn't it atrocious that some of these employees are now demanding that the country must return to the old pension system? These are basically selfish people. Selfish people who put self before the nation. They want to live in comfort. Let the rest go to hell. Well, the clamor of such people must be dismissed with the contempt it deserves. But it becomes a matter of agony when some ruling politicians fall prey to this unreasonable demand. Look at the governments of Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Jharkhand, Punjab. They have all gone out of the way to pander to this small privileged section of the population. The ruling politicians there think that such populist measures should help them reverse or at least neutralize the anti-incumbency sentiment against them. The same politicians are making the same promise in the states they are not in power. They are hoping that this inducement would prompt the government officials in those states to turn the electoral tide in their favor. In the process, they just ignore the calamity that they are inviting. Just look at the statistics. In 1990-91, the outgo for the states together on account of pension was just a little over 3,000 crore. By 2020-21, this is leapfrogged to almost 4 lakh crore. In 30 years, the pension bill has gone up by more than 100%. 100 times, not 100%, 100 times, 10,000%. Imagine what would be the situation if all states switched to the old pension system. The center mercifully has not fallen into this trap because it understands the havoc the pension bill will be causing if it reverts to the old system. Already the statistics are dire. In 1990-91, the union government's pension bill was again a little over 3,000 crore. By 2020, this has gone up to a little more than 2 lakh crore. Remember the difference? In the case of states, it was also 3,000 crore in 1990. It has gone up to more than 4 lakh crore. But in case of center, it has gone up from 3,000 crore to a little over 2 lakh crore. The data suggests that successive ruling parties at the center have acted rather responsibly compared to the states. The states, in fact, the opposition ruled states today are going berserk in the quest of political power. They are ready to ignore the financial ruin in the long term as they are focused only on political power in short term. All thinking people in the country must speak in unison to denounce these leaders who have already moved to the old pension system and those who are planning to do this in near future. We must be thankful to Praveen Chakravarti, the head of the Congress Data Analytic Department, for raising the issue with his own party, the Congress, and also with the Aam Aadmi Party, which have been promising a return to the old pension system in Gujarat if they came to power in the assembly elections next month. Praveen Chakrabarti has made his case with data, telltale data, that Gujarat has a population of 6.5 crore, out of which around 3 lakh people are in government service. That works out to just about 0.5%. But if the old pension scheme is adopted, that would entail an expenditure of 15% of the tax revenues garnered in the state. He asks, why should 0.5% of the privileged people get 15% of the taxpayers' money for their post-retirement benefit? In fact, the data is more disturbing when it comes to some other states which have opted for the old pension system. Look at Rajasthan. The old pension system will cost 30% of its own tax revenue. In Chhattisgarh, it will be 24%, but in Punjab, it's a whopping 35%. Isn't it criminal that less than 1% of government servants will walk away with 35% of state revenue in pension alone? It is sheer criminality. We must expose these criminals who are masquerading as politicians. Thank you. The Iranian football team showed exemplary courage in the World Cup match against England earlier this week, when they refused to sing the national anthem in solidarity with the people of Iran, especially the women, who are protesting today against the authoritarian regime of their country. As we all know, the protest has entered 7th week. It all began with the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in police custody in September this year. Mahsa had been arrested by the Iranian police for not wearing the hijab, the headscarf, in public. Hundreds of Iranian men and women hit the streets to register their anger against the Islamic Republic. More than 400 protesters have already been killed since then by the state forces, and thousands have been arrested and landed in jail. In this kind of an oppressive environment, it needs enormous courage and conviction for the Iranian football players to express solidarity with their fellow citizens. That too on an international platform, when the world is glued to the television to watch spectacular football on display. The Iranian football team refused to sing the national anthem to send out a message that it's not in sync with the national government. It was not merely a symbolic protest, it was not merely a silent protest, silently delivered. The captain of the team did not mince his words when he spoke in a press conference, and he made it very clear that the team expressed common cause with the people of Iran. It was indeed a very brave act, because this action and its open justification might cause these players not just their professional career in football, that might land them in jail, that even may make them face the firing squad of the Iranian government. Knowing this very well, that they spoke up as they wanted to defend a moral principle, even if it meant laying down their lives for it. When the nation's celebrities do it, they become the trailblazer for the entire people of this country. It's exactly the way the legendary boxer Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, had stood up for the moral cause in America during the height of the Vietnam War. The US government was drafting all eligible men into the army on a temporary basis to fight the war in Vietnam. Ali, who had already achieved the feat of a champion boxer, refused to be drafted, saying that he was opposed to the war in principle. In retaliation, his license was withdrawn, license for professional boxing in which he had made brilliant career. He was dragged to the court and the district court decreed a 5-year imprisonment. It was, I think, the year 1965. His lawyers challenged the decision and it took 5 years for the Supreme Court perhaps in 1970 that it struck down the conviction on the ground that Muhammad Ali was a consensus objector to the policy of war. Therefore, he could not be punished for living up to that principle. After a hiatus of 5 years, Muhammad Ali returned to the boxing ring and again triumphed as the world champion. Remember, he was ready to lose the glittering professional career for all time and was even ready to spend years in jail to show solidarity with the people of America, the people who had risen in unison against the US government's policy on Vietnam War. There are many such examples around the world of iconic sportspersons standing up for a cause. But unfortunately, there are so few examples in our own country. I sometimes wonder why many of our well-known sportspersons are such timid creatures, conformist at heart, shutting up to the establishment when the chips are down. How many of our legendary sportspersons of yesteryear had spoken up against the emergency when it was imposed in the country in 1975? How many of them had raised a voice against the ruling party in power when the country went up in flames in anti-Sikh riots in 1984? How many Khel Ratna awardees, Arjuna title holders, Bharat Ratna recipients, sportsmen, all had the courage to point the finger at the ruling party in Gujarat during the anti-Muslim riots in 2002. Our sports icons are indeed a shameless, selfish lot. They are a disgrace to the Indian nation and to the people of India. When you compare them with the football players of Iran, the boxers of the United States, and a host of other internationally acclaimed sportspersons who are ready to speak up against their bloodthirsty rulers. All the newspaper headlines today tell us that the Supreme Court bench, headed by Justice S.K. Kaul, took umbrage at the irresponsible statements made by Kiran Rijiju, the Union Law Minister. The right thing for the Supreme Court would have been to issue a contempt notice against the minister, demanded Vikas Singh, the President of the Supreme Court Bar Association. What was the issue? Vikas Singh is the lawyer for a petitioner who has urged the Apex Court to take immediate and concrete action to fill up the vacancies of the High Court and Supreme Court judges. for the speedy disposal of the cases pending for years. That brings us to the question, what is the process of the appointment of judges? 5 senior-most judges of the Supreme Court who constitute the collegium deliberate and select the names of the judges and send it to the government. The government is supposed to notify the names after conducting due diligence with regard to the intelligence reports. If the government finds anything amiss, then it can get back to the collegium with its reports for a reconsideration of the names. If the collegium accepts the government's recommendation, then the name is withdrawn. But if the collegium chooses to stand by its original decision, then the government is duty bound to notify the names. This is the process. But what is actually happening on the ground? The Supreme Court collegium is sending its recommendations again and again, but in many cases the government is sitting over it, refusing to respond. In some cases, it is cherry picking a few names which it is notifying and rejecting the others. In a few other cases, it is getting back to the apex court asking for a reconsideration. But even as the Supreme Court has reiterated its stand about the selected names, the Union government, instead of notifying the appointment, is again sitting tight over the files. This is happening despite the fact the rules of engagement agreed between the executive and the judiciary stipulates a deadline within which government will respond to the original selection of names, and it is also fixed a time limit within which names sent back by the apex court after reconsideration must be notified. Despite these clearly stated rules, the Union government has been flagrantly violating the terms of engagement, and the Supreme Court has been helplessly watching it. What has added insult to the injury of the Supreme Court is the shenanigans of the new loudmouth law minister. It appears as if this thick-skinned politician named Kiran Rijiju has been anointed as a union law minister with a specific mandate to rub salts on the wounds of the judiciary day in and day out. He has been trashing the collegium system on every available forum. That is unpardonable. After all, the collegium system is the law of the land. The ruling party may have its objections, but it has to follow the dictum so long as it is the law. Supreme Court has been all this while taking these flippant statements of the minister in its stride. But yesterday, Vikas Singh drew attention of the court to an interview given by the minister to a TV channel. The minister was asked what the government was doing about the pending appointments of the HC and SC judges, given that apex court was very upset about the delay. The minister had the gall to respond that if the Supreme Court is upset, then let it appoint. Let it run the show. Why is it looking to the government? This sarcasm of the minister has clearly crossed the Rubicon, said Vikas Singh. He asked the court to issue contempt notice against the minister. But the SC judges did not want to stoop to the gutter level the minister had descended. They exercised self-restraint and requested the Attorney General and the Solicitor General to convey to the government their concern over the matter. But the judges should know politicians like Rijiju are doing a hatchet job. They would see decency shown by the court as its weakness and would spew venom again and again. The court must squarely confront these vicious men who are out to destroy our democratic institutions. Thank you. Justice Sandeep Kumar of the Patna High Court must be congratulated for showing the arbitrary executive its place. What did the police in Patna do? In the case of a land dispute, an affected party complained, and while the matter was in the court, the police went and demolished the opposite party's house. Justice Kumar rightly asked, "ये क्या तमाशा बना रखा है?" Who has given the powers to the police to take action on a matter, that to demolish a house by bulldozer when the same matter is sub judice? Justice Sandeep Kumar has drawn attention to a very, very significant question, which is troubling all of us, the law-abiding citizens of this country. How can police in Patna arrogate to itself the power to demolish a house? Unfortunately, the unruly police in Patna has got the inspiration from the thugs ruling in Lucknow, Guwahati and Bhopal. Road police in these states, as well as in Delhi, have been demolishing the houses, especially of a particular community, on one pretext or the other, at the behest of their political masters. The judiciary had to step in Delhi, in Uttar Pradesh, to stop the criminal action of the government agencies. A bench of Guwahati High Court had last month warned the Assam police that it cannot, under the guise of investigation, demolish anyone's house without the judicial sanction. Despite all such strong remarks, road politicians ruling in the states have been defiantly bulldozing the rule of law and leaving it to the judiciary as a fait accompli. Accept it or go to hell seems to be the message to the court from the executive. In the process, the primacy of the rule of law has gone to the dots. The government has become the prosecutor and the judge in the same case. This is a dangerous situation for the democracy of our country. Will the judiciary succeed in reversing that process? That's a question on the lips of every law-abiding citizen of this country. The announcement of the jury at the International Film Festival of India in Goa, dubbing the film The Kashmir Files as vulgar, dominated the television headlines yesterday. The chair of the jury, the Israeli filmmaker Nadav Lapid, said during the closing ceremony, there were 15 films in the international competition. 14 out of them had cinematic qualities. We were, all of us, however, disturbed and shocked by the 15th film, The Kashmir Files. That felt to us like a propaganda, vulgar movie, inappropriate for an artistic, competitive section of such a prestigious film festival. This comment of Lapid has raised the hackles of the saffron establishment, as it had extended wholehearted support for the success of the film through the party organization and through the party governments, both in the states and at the center. It was quite natural that the members of the establishment have come to the defense of the film. Opinion and perspectives can differ. Everyone has a right to articulate it freely in a democracy. There is, however, no need to get personal. It was in poor taste that the saffron troll army started questioning the antecedents of Nadav Lapid, the jury chair. What they found? That he, an Israeli, was a sympathizer of the Palestinian cause. How could a Palestinian sympathizer be invited to chair a jury in India? They asked. I wonder if being a defender of the Palestinian cause a crime or a disqualification. If we are questioning how an Israeli national could defend Palestine without being an anti-national, then you are showing your smallness of mind. You are showing the signs of an ill-educated mind. When the BBC exposed the dubious strategy of the British government during the Falklands War, the BBC was not being dubbed as anti-national. It was doing its job, that of pursuit of truth without fear or favor. In a democracy, every creative person, in fact, every citizen has a right to critique their own government and, if need be, to support the enemy government if the cause is right. And they can always do so without being called secessionists. Well, Lapid was not invited to head the jury of the film festival because he was a defender of the Palestinian cause. He was there because he is a distinguished filmmaker. His latest film, Ahedni, won the jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival last year. In fact, in 2014, his film, The Kindergarten Teacher, had won the Best Actor award in IFFI in our own country that year. And then the characterization of the Kashmir Files as a propaganda film is not that of Lapid alone. It is the unanimous verdict of an international jury, not chosen by the Tukde gang, but carefully put together by the big bosses of our information and broadcasting ministry. Who are the members of this international jury? American producer Jinko Goto, French film editor Pastel Clevens, documentary filmmaker and journalist Javier Anglo Berturin. Will the troll army find some connection of the American and French filmmakers with the murderous regime of Iran? Nothing could be more bizarre than when you stoop down to that gutter level. The Kashmir Files may be a popular film. It may have grossed hundreds of crores at the box office. That could partly be due to the open support of the government in many states and at the center. But its cinematic quality can only be judged by eminent and insightful filmmakers. A period film may stick to the facts, but how it handles the nuances and how it portrays the complex emotions decides whether a film is a propaganda tool or it's a great cinematic effort. It is nobody's case that there should be no cinema created on the plight of the Kashmiri Pandits. But in the hands of a sensitive filmmaker, their plight will come out in a poignant manner. But in the hand of a pedestrian filmmaker, that will only encourage bloodthirsty men to demand their pound of flesh. Kashmir Files comes across as a propaganda film. If some think, let them think about it. Those who think, no, it's a great cinematic effort, let them accept it that way. We must learn to agree to disagree. The problem arises when you look at conspiracies, a Muslim angle to attack a perspective you do not agree with. When you do so, the tolerant democracy ends and intolerant authoritarian culture opens its ugly face. We must not allow that to happen, to take deep roots here in our own beloved country. Thank you. Media reports tell us how Himanta Biswa Sharma, Assam Chief Minister, has been of late making outrageous statements to increase the communal temperature in this country. Look at the latest example. During the election campaign in Gujarat, he kept describing the murder of Shraddha Water in Delhi by her live-in partner Aftab as a love jihad. Is he trying to be a poster boy of the communal organizations in the country that have been spreading the vicious campaign against interfaith marriages? How do the likes of Sharma and their legion of followers define love jihad? When a Muslim boy marries or romantically gets involved with a Hindu girl, they try to portray it as planned, insidious attempt by jihadi Muslims to win away Hindu girls into their fold. In any village or town anywhere in the country, these communal outfits hound the Muslim men seeking a relationship outside their religion, hound them to a point where they perforce abandon the relationship or face ostracization and even death. We have been reading news reports about several Muslim men facing a harrowing time, even a threat to their life, for choosing a Hindu girl as their partner. That doesn't happen so openly in the metro cities because of the relatively cosmopolitan environment there. When actor Richa Chadha marries actor Ali Fazal, a Muslim, in Mumbai, the communal army finds it difficult to attack them physically or hold out threats to their life. But they don't remain silent. The troll army gets hyperactive to heap abuses on them on the social media. A Shraddha worker walked out of her home despite her mother's fervent appeals to live with Aftab, whom she had met on a dating platform. It was supposed to be a romantic involvement, but in due course, Aftab turned out to be a monster. Available evidence tells us that Shraddha was physically assaulted and mentally harassed. Why did she not walk out on such a despicable character is a matter of investigation. Aftab has had clearly a criminal mindset. The manner in which he killed Shraddha and chopped her body into pieces to dispose them of, only a man with a devious criminal mindset could do that. It was a pure act of dastardly crime. But to call it love jihad, one has to have a deeply entrenched communal mindset. Himanta Biswa Sharma is clearly demonstrating that he belongs to that vicious communal tribe. How will he and other proponents of love jihad explain the several disturbing murder incidents in the last 1 month itself, in which Hindu men have been involved in killing their Hindu paramours and cutting their bodies into small pieces just as Aftab did? Was that just a criminal act or a heinous crime induced by their religious faith? After all, both the killers and the victims were Hindus in those cases. There is a vast army of semi-literate and unemployed youth belonging to the communal outfits in our country, which derive sustenance from being foot soldiers of a charged communal campaign. Many decades ago, such men belonged to the periphery of India's political and social platform. When a chief minister echoes the same sentiment, expresses the same voice, those communal groups begin to get official legitimacy. People like Himanta Biswa Sharma have contributed to shifting the communal discourse from the periphery to the mainstream of India's political and social landscape. The people of India, who are proud believers in India's secular tradition, must speak up to protect and uphold that glorious tradition of Indian secularism. Thank you. There are reports that the Iranian government has disbanded the morality police. It means that no women in Iran will now be whisked away for not wearing hijab in public. As we know, more than 2 months ago, the protest has been erupted against the morality police all over Iran after 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was picked up from the streets by the police for improperly wearing the headscarf. Mind you, she was wearing the headscarf. Her headscarf was on, but she has been charged that she had not worn it properly. What fueled the fire, of course, was due to the tragedy that followed. Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old girl, died in police custody on September 16, just 3 days after her arrest. And that caused the furor. Thousands of men and women poured into the streets to protest against the government. Defiance of the state authority was visible all across the country. This kind of resistance was truly unprecedented in a totalitarian mullah-ruled Iran. China was another totalitarian country where the protests by the common men and women spilled over to the streets. In China, as we know, the immediate spark was the stringent zero-COVID policy of the government that delayed the entry of a fire brigade to douse the fire in an apartment complex. More than 10 people died in that tragedy. Chinese men and women on the streets raised slogans against the government, and what is striking, they also raised the voice against the all-powerful Xi Jinping, who has secured an unprecedented third term as Chinese president. The Chinese government was forced to roll back or ease the COVID regulations, bowing to the protest of brave Chinese people. Both the situations have an important lesson for us in our country. Unlike Iran and China, we are a democracy. Non-violent protest is a fundamental right guaranteed to us by our constitution. But authoritarian governments may come to power in different states or even at the center, which would be tempted to curb our freedom. We can see that happening in our country all these years. These democratically elected governments which have turned authoritarian are dubbing some of the non-violent protests as seditious. They're branding the peaceful protesters as anti-nationals. We, the citizens of India, must not be intimidated. The Chinese and the Iranian people should give us inspiration. If they could courageously fight against authoritarian, rather totalitarian governments, we should have the courage of conviction to expose the anti-democratic policies of the governments which we have elected to power. Yes, Chinese and Iranian protesters should be our current role models. Thank you. Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar had joined forces with the Union Law Minister Kiran Rijiju to target the judiciary. Minister Rijiju has been at work for last several months to undermine the authority of the judiciary and to establish the supremacy of the executive. The Vice President lending his voice to the minister in castigating the judiciary day in and day out is indeed a dangerous precedent for our democracy. What did the Vice President say? As if speaking from the same script which Minister Rijiju has been using for several months, Vice President Dhankar said, that too on the floor of the Rajya Sabha, that the 2015 judgment striking down the National Judicial Appointments Commission Act was a glaring instance of severe compromise of parliamentary sovereignty and disregard of the wishes of the common people. The Vice President did not stop there. His diatribe continued further when he said, Parliament had almost unanimously passed the 99th Constitutional Amendment Bill, paving the way for the NGAC Act. This historic mandate was undone by the Supreme Court in 2019 on the ground that it was not in consonance with the basic structure of the Constitution. Was that a fallacy on the part of the Constitution? Then comes the Vice President's astounding remark. There is no parallel to such a development in democratic history where a duly legitimized constitutional prescription has been judicially undone. One cannot expect all politicians to be well read and well informed. But when they are holding important constitutional positions, at least one expects they have the benefit of expert advice. One wonders how the speechwriters of these dignitaries are also an ignorant lot, exposing the holders of the constitutional positions to public ridicule. Vice President Dhankar, speech writer, should have known, but he writes for him that there is no parallel to such a development in democratic history. Who will tell him that hundreds of such examples abound in the US history alone? In the Marbury versus Madison case, while striking down a law passed by the American Congress as unconstitutional, John Marshall, perhaps the most famous Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court, had made it clear to the Congress the Supreme Court's responsibility to overturn constitutional legislation was a necessary consequence of their sworn oath of office to uphold the Constitution. John Marshall's dictum in 1803 remains the guiding principle even today. The US Supreme Court had struck down as many as 483 laws as unconstitutional in the period of 1960 to 2019 alone. And lo and behold, our Vice President is saying on the floor of Parliament that there is no parallel in the democratic history to our Supreme Court striking down the NJSC Act. The Vice President and the Law Minister of our country urgently need to undergo a crash course for understanding the significance of the judicial review in upholding a democratic constitution, lest they continue to make ludicrous statements, making our great country a butt of joke in the international fora. Thank you. The Hindu newspaper carried a hard-hitting editorial yesterday with the headline, "Extreme Measure. Not every instance of sharing false information requires arrest and remand." The edit was about the arrest of Saket Gokhale, a Trinamool Congress spokesman who had tweeted that the Prime Minister's visit to Morbi town cost the state exchequer rupees 30 crore. That was 6 times the money the families of 140 victims of Morbi tragedy had received, the tweet said. Remember, the hanging bridge at Morbi had collapsed on October 30 this year. 135 people, including 40 children, had died on the spot. Scores had been critically injured. The Prime Minister visited the site on November 1. The TV channels beamed how the state government went on an overdrive and worked day and night for 36 hours to make the Prime Minister's visit pleasant. Roads leading to the Morbi hospital were resurfaced. The hospital got a fresh coat of paint. The tiles on the floors and the walls of the hospital were replaced. New beds, new mattresses, new bed sheets, new pillow covers were brought in, so that when the Prime Minister visited the hospital ward, he is not repulsed by the savvy environment. You would also remember the TV cameras showing how a new water cooler had also been installed, but the management had forgotten to give the water connection to the cooler. It was all a show business on a grand scale. Well, for this grand event management, rupees 30 crore may be an exaggeration. But did that warrant arrest and remand of Gokhale? The Hindu edit draws attention to a bitter irony. Gokhale is arrested on the charge of false information. Well, who did that false information affect? It affected the image of the state government. A government which, despite desperately tried to hide the despicable state of affairs of the government-run hospitals. Gokhale was arrested because he exaggerated the fever. But look at the Oreva company. The company which had been given the contract to renovate the bridge, as the inquiry says, had apparently spent just 12 lakh, but it had claimed it spent rupees 22 crore. The company also gave false information. And who did that false information affect? It cost 140 lives. But see the irony. All the big guns of Oreva are walking free, walking tall. Can you see the rogue politicians at work? You arrest someone on the charge of false information because he is a political opponent. Mind you, his crime was he dented the reputation of the state government. But you do not arrest someone, you let him go scot-free, even as he has given false information. A false information that has cost the lives of 140 innocent men, women and children. Why did you let him go? Because they are money bags for you. They will come in use for you during the elections. But then, why should you bother if Hindu editorial writes or anyone says this, when this brazen display of crony capitalism gets you unprecedented electoral success? That's the tragic irony of our democracy. Thank you. The Communist Party of India, Marxist, is clearly playing into the hands of the BJP government in power at the center. The CPM MP, Vikas Ranjan Bhattacharya, introduced a bill in the Rajya Sabha yesterday asking for the constitution of a national judicial commission for appointing judges of the Supreme Court as well as the High Courts in India. It's interesting that the CPM MP introduced this bill just days after the union government machinery had gone on overdrive to trash the present collegium system. The law ministry, in fact the law minister himself, and even the Vice President of India, the chairman of the Rajya Sabha, are loudly asking for the resurrection of the National Judicial Appointments Act, which had been struck down by the Supreme Court. The Apex Court had struck it down in 2015, saying that the NJSC Act was not in consonance with the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. The Supreme Court's decision in 2015 was indeed a very welcome move. The independence of the judiciary from the stranglehold of the executive is of paramount importance if we have to defend and protect our hard-won democracy. Let us remember that we have three organs of the state: executive, legislature and judiciary. In a parliamentary system, the executive and the legislative organs are fused. The Prime Minister of India is the supreme leader of both the executive as well as the legislature. That is why the legislature cannot act as a check on the depredations of the executive. It's an ally in the process. The only organ of the state that can put a leash on a runaway executive is the judiciary. That's the reason why the independence of the judiciary must be fiercely protected. Otherwise, the guardrails of our democratic institutions will be mercilessly chipped away. The executive everywhere has a natural tendency to control all levers of power and harness them to further its political agenda. It's true of the BJP government today. It was also true of the Congress government in the yesteryears. And the same is equally true of the regional parties in power in different states, whether it is TMC in West Bengal, the CPM in Kerala, or the Aam Aadmi Party in Delhi. India, in particular, the judiciary is the only institution on which we can have faith that it would deliver justice. Yes, we know there have been some judges who have seamlessly kowtowed to the governments in the past and have been richly rewarded for their loyal service. But you can't do anything about such unscrupulous men. But there are many independent judges who cannot be bought over. We need to ensure that conditions are conducive for they maintaining their independence and the independence of the entire judiciary. The executive control in deciding the names of the judges will make our Supreme Court subservient to the Law Ministry of the Government of India. Law Minister Kiran Rijiju would love that. But if we have to save our democracy, then the collegium system must be preserved with full force. Yes, there can be discussions on improving the functioning of the collegium system, but every democracy-loving citizen must firmly reject the plan to bring in the National Judicial Commission in place of the collegium system. We must remember that a National Judicial Commission would inevitably pave the way for an authoritarian state, both in form as well as in spirit. Thank you. Newspapers reported last weekend that two councillors, both Muslims, who had just been elected to the Municipal Corporation of Delhi on the Congress ticket, had declared that they were joining the Aam Aadmi Party. But within 24 hours, they had to eat their words and had to return to the Congress fold. How did this miracle happen? As we know, the MCD election results were declared on December 4. Out of the 250 seats in the MCD council, the Aam Aadmi Party won 134 and the BJP 104. The Congress got a measly 9 seats. The MCD election was largely a bipolar affair. The BJP had been in control of MCD for the last 15 years. And Aam Aadmi Party has been ruling over Delhi state for last 8 years. It posed an effective challenge and came up trumps this time. The Congress could win only a few seats where Muslims constituted a majority of the voters. For most Muslim voters in Delhi, the Congress was the preferred choice compared to the Aam Aadmi Party. Many of them did not consider or intend to support BJP as the ruling party's majoritarian agenda is quite clear. The ruling party has stubbornly refused to nominate Muslims in any election in the country, even as Muslims constitute 15% of the population of our country. But the BJP has been riding a Hindu vote bank to achieve spectacular electoral success. The so-called secular parties, like the Congress and the Aam Aadmi Party, to take two specific examples in Delhi, which were accused of minority appeasement, had to change tack in the face of aggressive Hindutva campaign. Earlier, these parties had taken the Hindu vote for granted. But with BJP's strong Hindutva pitch, these parties realized that minority appeasement politics should backfire. That's why their answer to the BJP was soft Hindutva. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi and Aam Aadmi Party leader Arvind Kejriwal began visiting temples. Rahul Gandhi displayed his Janevu to reinforce his Hindu credentials. Arvind Kejriwal recited Hanuman Chalisa to tell the world how much of a devout Hindu he is. In the process, both the Congress and the Aam Aadmi Party refused to raise the issue of communally polarizing campaign of the BJP, lest they lose Hindu votes. It was a race between the Aam Aadmi Party and the Congress, who could stoop to what level to win Hindu hearts, but at the same time not to be called communal the way the BJP is often targeted. In this race, the Aam Aadmi Party decided to make a very clear ideological shift. It said it would not open its lips on any issues affecting the Muslims in particular. When the rapists of Bilkis Bano were released and secular India rose in protest, Arvind Kejriwal and company kept their lips sealed. When hotments of Muslims were being bulldozed in Delhi and different parts of Uttar Pradesh, Kejriwal looked the other way. But the Congress did not go that far in its quest for retaining the Hindu vote. The Congress leaders spoke against the release of the rapists. And they also spoke up against singling out Muslims, especially their huts, for demolition. It's true that the voice of the Congress leader has been relatively feeble compared to what it was in the past. But at least they have not abandoned the minority community completely in their quest for a slice of the 85% of Hindu vote. That's why a major section of Muslims in Delhi have, by and large, jettisoned the AAP and cast their lot with the Congress. That explains the Congress success in the few seats in Delhi where Muslims had a decisive say in the MCD election. But two councillors who got elected on the Congress ticket felt they could personally stand to gain by joining hands with the Aam Aadmi Party, which has taken control of the MCD this time. They thought they would be able to sell the idea to their constituents that by joining the ruling party, they would be in a better position to serve the constituents better. But they had not bargained for the wrath of the Muslim families who had voted for them in good faith. The Muslim voters rose in revolt. The councillors had to flee to save their lives. Voters made it very, very clear that they elected leaders should not be allowed to enter the area. They would be forced to resign as councillors. The anger was so palpable that these two Muslim councillors went to the social media tendering an unqualified apology for announcing the earlier decision of defection to the AAP. They made a public declaration that they would serve the people in their word faithfully as Congress councillors for the entire term. Here is a case where people's voice mattered. We must salute the voters of Mustafabad who showed the defectors their true place. Thank you. The announcement by the newly elected Chief Minister of Himachal Pradesh, Sukhbinder Singh Sukkhu, that he would implement the old pension scheme in the first cabinet meeting itself. That's an announcement which is clearly an invitation to disaster. Yes, this promise was part of the Congress Party's election manifesto that will restore the old pension system. Now that the Congress has won power, won the election in Himachal, it's duty bound to implement it. But let us not mince words. The Congress Party is clearly playing with fire. To make immediate electoral gains, it's ready to place the economy of the state in peril. The calculations are devious. The current Sudhud government will not have to pay 14% of the current salary bill as is mandated by the new pension system. It's only a future government approximately 15 years down the line, which will have to bear the burden of paying 50% of the salary bill, which is as per the guaranteed pension scheme to the retired employees. But then, 15 years is a long time in politics. By that time, Sudhus of the world may be dead physically or politically and gone. Whoever ascends to power then will face the nightmare as to how to bear this colossal financial burden. As per the government data, Himachal has one of the highest proportion of payout to retired employees as a share of its revenue expenditure. It's 38.1%, second only to Punjab's 43.1%. This is the situation when just 14% outgo on account on the NPS. Imagine the state of the economy in Himachal Pradesh when payout begins on the basis of a full-blown old pension system. Whichever party comes to power then will possibly declare insolvency. Companies go bankrupt. In this case, the state itself will go bust. The bigger tragedy awaits Punjab, where the current outgo on account of pension is 43% of the current revenue of the state. The debts of the state are so high already. It would increase manifold. The Aam Aadmi Party government there is postponing the economic disaster to a later date. This irresponsible politics began with the Congress government of Rajasthan and which was followed up by the other Congress government in Chhattisgarh. Both chief ministers, Gehlot and Badhel, were insecure about their position because of internal factionalism. They thought restoration of the old pension system was a trump card to strengthen their own political base. The Congress, as a result, today stands clearly exposed that it is ready to shuck up to any plank, irrespective of its consequences, for immediate electoral benefits. That's really a tragic irony. Remember, the Congress has been accusing the BJP of communalizing the politics for immediate electoral advantage. It keeps saying that the BJP knows fully well that the communal fire will burn the social fabric of the nation beyond recognition. Knowing it well, it's still playing for electoral gains. It's indeed disturbing that both the leading national parties of our country have jettisoned the long-term interest of the country for short-term electoral gains. This is a dangerous template they have created. Smaller parties like the Aam Aadmi Party have no scruples to follow that example and push the country further into the quagmire. Should we, the informed citizens of the country, allow this tragic political theatre to be played out in front of our eyes? That's a question we all must ask.